there's a couple of things that I wanted to bring up. The first, I mentioned this yesterday briefly, but I wanted to dig into it a little deeper. Shane Farnan, our associate producer here, received an email from the Democratic Party, or from Debbie Wasserman Schultz, saying, how are we doing? What should we do in the future? And if you were advising the Democratic Party, what would your advice be? My advice would be go to core principles. Go back, for that matter, go look at the 1956 Republican Party platform. It's kind of the Democratic Party platform these days. Strengthen unions, strengthen Social Security, rebuild the nation's infrastructure. I would say go to core principles. All of these victories that have been achieved over the last century, really. I mean, there were a few that came out of the Republican Party back when there were progressives in the Republican Party. Teddy Roosevelt, William Howard Taft, 1900, or 1901. But really, everything else has come from Democrats. The 40-hour work week, the clean air and water. Yeah, it happened on Nixon's administration, but he tried to veto it. It was Democratic Congress that pushed that through. The workplace protections, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, minimum wage, clean water, clean air. I mean, knowing that our food is safe. The one thing where I personally think that the Democratic Party has really blown it big time, and this is where I would advise them to recalibrate, is with regard to trade. And there are some Democrats who are really good on this. I mean, you get people from the Progressive Caucus and Jan Schakowsky, Raul Grijalva, Keith Ellison. They will be the first to tell you that our trade policies stink. I mean, I live down at the waterfront here in D.C. They're doing a $2.5 billion redevelopment down there. And I believe, I may be wrong on this, I'm not privy to the inside details, but what I've heard, from people who live around me, is that some of that money is coming from China. Well, of course, all our jobs went to China. So I would advise the Democratic Party to fess up and say, Bill Clinton made a big mistake. And the party should have embraced Ross Perot, or at least Ross Perot's ideas. Bill Clinton should have said in those debates where Bill Clinton and George Herbert Walker Bush both made fun of Ross Perot back in 1992. Bill Clinton should have said, Ross, you're right. And he shouldn't have signed NAFTA and CAFTA, and President Obama should not be planning to sign or promoting SHAFTA, the Southern Hemisphere Asian Free Trade Agreement, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, they call it, TPP. Shouldn't be doing it. We need to go back to a trade policy that is, and I'm going to use this word, protectionist. Yeah, protectionist. So that's number one. I'm curious your thoughts on, how would you advise the Democratic Party? And in kind of the face of that, there's an interesting piece by Charles Blow in today's New York Times, "The Solid South Will Rise Again." And I mentioned this, I think almost a year ago, and a couple of people jumped on me saying that I was being, not calling me a racist, but saying that I was exaggerating the importance of race, or that, the Republicans wouldn't do that, or this kind of thing. And what I had said at the time, and I said it because I had heard it from a Democratic strategist who was familiar with Republican strategists, was that part of the Republican strategy, particularly in the South, was to, quote, blacken the Democratic Party. And the way that they do this is by redrawing districts. So that basically people in Democratic districts are going to typically be also in districts that are majority black, and so the representatives that they elect will be black. Now, nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's a fine thing. We need more people of color in Congress. But when the Republicans turn this into an election strategy, then it becomes bizarre. And frankly, I don't think it helps either race or any race. I don't think it helps anybody except the Republicans. And this is what Charles Blow, who himself is African American, what Charles Blow pointed out. He said, according to the Census Bureau, 6 of the 10 states with the largest black alone or in combination populations in 2010 were southern states: Florida, Texas, Georgia, North Carolina, Maryland, and Virginia. And the 4 that experienced substantial growth between 2000 and 2010 in their blacks alone or in combination populations were all southern: Florida, Georgia, Texas, North Carolina. And he points out this. He says the degree to which the South remains solidly Republican may well depend on the changing racial composition of southern states, specifically a rise in their non-white population. But he talks about the story of one of his brothers told about being transferred along with a white coworker. His brother, of course, is African American, to Mississippi, and the white guy and the black guy were both shopping for homes at the same time, separate from each other. And the white guy was told by his real estate agent, he said, "What about this neighborhood?" And the real estate agent said, "You don't want to live there. That's where the Democrats live," which was code for black people. I mean, that's how far it's gone. And Charles Blow, writing today in the New York Times, African-American, brilliant commentator, he says he may well have been right. Mississippi is among the most racially bifurcated states politically, with one of the highest percentage of black voters in the country. In 2012, 96% of blacks voted for Democratic presidential ticket, according to exit polling data, while 89% of whites voted for the Republican district. And then he quotes Pat Buchanan. He says, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Arkansas will not send a single white Democrat to Congress. If Mary Landrieu loses her runoff, the only Democrats in the House from the Deep South states will be African Americans. This has been part of the racial strategy, in my opinion, of the Republican Party. So I find that fascinating. And I think that if the Democratic Party wants to expand into the white population in the South, the way to do it is not with, quote, social issues. It's not pot and gay marriage. It is economics. It's raising the minimum wage. It's changing our trade policies. Our trade policies should be at the very top of the pile. Because everybody knows this in this country, right? Since Clinton signed NAFTA, we've lost, 60, 80, 90, we've lost 60,000 factories, according to Bernie Sanders, just since George Bush became president. You'd take it back, another decade, it's probably 100,000 factories. So they need to run on economics.